Hi, welcome to Yoga Selection. My name is Rod. Our focus today, the restorative pose Viparita Karani. We'll be using a bolster, 3 blankets and a block. We're going to be paying particular attention to how to get into the pose and troubleshooting some of the common problems that tend to arise when people are coming into the pose. We'll explore 3 versions of the pose, one that is very accessible for newer students. We'll then look at a more intermediate way of getting into the pose. And eventually we'll look at a variation of the pose, a way of getting into the pose that will suit more experienced students. But let's start with the basics. And so Viparita Karani, it's a pose where we take our legs straight up the wall. The first version that we'll work with, the legs will be a little bit angled, and it will be particularly suited to people who have tighter hamstrings and find the full version of the pose challenging. So we'll just use a bolster, and rather than having the bolster, the long edge of the bolster parallel to the wall, we'll actually turn the bolster and tuck it a little bit up the wall. I've got about a third of the bolster up the wall. It varies a little bit according to your height. Taller people, the bolster is going to be further out, and smaller people, the bolster is going to be a little bit higher up the wall. The intention here is to get your pelvis up onto the bolster. The angle of your legs, it will be roughly 60 degrees, maybe a little bit more vertical than that. So I'm going to angle my bolster. I've got about a third of it tucked up the wall. We'll use a blanket for the head, but just a flat blanket. So we won't need a lot of height for the head. The purpose of the blanket is more for cushioning against the potential hardness of the floor. This one's a little bit more simple to get into, so we'll all do it together. With the next couple of versions, I might demonstrate it, and then we can do it together. But be ready. Let's have the bolster tucked up the wall, and sit as I am with your feet either side of the bolster. You've got your hips to the floor. Importantly, your hands need to come back to the floor a little bit behind your hips. You've got the blanket there, not under your hands, but somewhere where you can easily reach it when you eventually get into the pose. We'll come in stages, so try not to rush ahead, even if this is a pose that you feel that you can quite comfortably work with. So first action, we need to press down with our hands and lift the pelvis up and onto the bolster. And then we pause and we walk the hands closer in. We need to repeat that so that the hips get further onto the bolster, so that they're less inclined then to slide off the bolster when we lower our head and shoulders down to the floor. As we press down with the hands, we lift the hips again, but make sure that you also lift the heels of your feet. So the ankle joints come closer to the wall, the lower shin comes closer to the wall, and you lift your hips up and move the pelvis in nice and close to the wall. Now, the common thing that tends to happen here is at this stage, people put their legs up the wall, and then when they lie back, they slide off the bolster. So that your hips remain exactly where you've carefully positioned them. Before we take the legs up, let's first of all come down onto the elbows, making sure that the pelvis stays on the bolster. Still with the feet to the floor, still with the pelvis on the bolster. Bring the head and the shoulders down. You can tuck your shoulders under, reach back, and pull that blanket in and underneath the back of the skull. Bring your arms out by your sides, palms facing up. And then last of all, we straighten the legs and have the legs up the wall. It's just the heels that rest to the wall. You could have your feet together. And you can see for this particular version of the pose, it's well suited to people who have tighter hamstrings and who struggle to get their legs straight with their sitting bones, their pelvis all the way to the wall. Make sure that the chest has remained open. You can tuck your shoulders under, the biceps, the muscles on the upper arms rotating outwards. Make sure that the blanket is supporting the head. You've got your forehead just a fraction higher the chin, but you're not pulling hard the chin down in towards the throat. You should find that with minimal effort, the legs can stay together without the feet coming apart. And it's quite a naturally relaxing position for the body. As a consequence of that, when you go to breathe out, there's a nice, smooth, even exhalation. So our focus today more about getting into Viparita Karani and troubleshooting some of the problems that people tend to have when they practice the pose. So we won't at this stage stay too long in the pose. To come out of it though, good if we've got a clear method of first action, just hips stay where they are. We bring the legs down to cross leg and the ankles can rest there onto the top end of the bolster, knees release out to the side. Just give a moment for the circulation to settle again. And then we can slide further back, bringing our hips all the way down to the floor, and then with the opposite cross leg, we can just rest the ankles onto the bolster, knees out to the side. A couple of breaths there, and we can then roll to the side, to the right side to come up. And so let's now get a little closer to the more classical version of the pose. We'll change the position of the bolster. We're going to bring it so that it's parallel with the wall, and we're leaving just a little bit of a gap there between the bolster and the wall. It's just enough of a gap for the tailbone to just sit down into. So what's that, about the 3 fingers width there, maybe roughly 5 centimetres, a couple of inches or so. Still we'll use that head blanket. It can stay more or less where it is. It won't get in the way of how we're going to get into this pose. I'm going to show a technique that will help to troubleshoot the problem that many people have, and that's the one of taking the legs up the wall without sliding back off the bolster. And this technique will assist you to get your sitting bones all the way into the wall. So the way we'll do it, maybe I'll demonstrate it once and then we can do it together when I do it the second time. So we're sitting on the bolster. We're sitting to the right side of the bolster. It means that the left shoulder is adjacent to the wall. Notice how I've got my left arm. It's coming around the head of the shins and just hugging the legs. And my right hand, it can come down to the floor. As it does, notice I lean a bit to the right, and we maintain that. And we just slide then the left hip over until it touches the wall. All right, second stage, I bring my left hand, it's cupping the shins, I bring it down to the floor, and that supports my weight, so I can then bring my right forearm all the way down to the floor. Notice how I'm turning more onto my side, and it enables me now to be able to slide the right sitting bone. The sitting bone of the bottom hip can come all the way to the wall. So take your time and you bring that hip all the way to the wall. At this point, both sitting bones are in contact with the wall. Next stage, the left hand, I bring it level to the right hand, and it still supports my body weight. As I then bring my right arm underneath the left arm, palm facing up, shoulder comes to the floor, and then it's just a matter of swiveling the legs up the wall, arms come out to the side. Ideally, you won't have yoga props there to interrupt the position of the left arm. The arms are about 45 degrees out from the side of the body. We can just reach back and slide that blanket in all the way under the head and under the back of the neck. But that technique of coming into the pose allows the sitting bones to get right the way into the wall. Let's do it together. So I'll go through those same stages exactly. What we might do is just move that head blanket a little bit out of the way so it's not going to get in the way of your hands and your forearm when they come down. When you swivel, as I did, the legs up the wall, you need to make sure that you eventually end up in the center of the bolster. Hence we're sitting to the right side of the bolster. You've got your knees bent, your left shoulder is touching the wall, and your left forearm is hugging the knees. And then the right hand, it comes down to the floor. In order for it to reach the floor, we need to lean a little bit away from the wall. Pressing the right hand down, we then move the left hip over until it touches the wall. The left hand then, it can come down to the floor, and it supports you so that you can then bring the right elbow and forearm flat to the floor. We've got the left hand and the right forearm pressing down. We've almost turned onto our side, so we can now slide the pelvis all the way until the right sitting bone makes contact with the wall. The left hand then, we slide it further out so that it is level to the right hand. We press the left hand down and slide the right arm underneath the left arm, palm facing up. Shoulder comes to the floor, and then we swivel the legs up the wall. Arms come out to the side, 45 degrees. It's in class situations, it's quite common to have someone quite nearby to you. It might mean that there's not sufficient room to have your arms out to the side at 45 degrees, in which case you can bring the elbows out level to the shoulders and just rest the forearms down onto the floor. We'll stay longer in the pose once we get to the fuller version of the pose. Just something to note, because we're practicing that action, we have consciously chosen quite a low height under the hips, so it's just the one bolster. And to know that a Viparita Karani box, the wooden prop that's commonly used for this pose, it's a fair bit higher than that. So at least the height of a yoga block on its tall end, even potentially a little bit higher than that. So if we boost the height under the hips, it makes it quite difficult to do that approach that we just did then, coming in from the side. So what's better is if we learn a forward rolling technique to come into the pose. That allows us to be able to build the hip height higher. So we'll bring the legs down to cross leg, and then we'll slide back and change the cross leg, and then we'll bring the knees together, roll to the right side and come up. So we look now at the forward rolling technique for getting into the pose. What I'm going to do for me is I'm going to move the bolster a little bit further out now from the wall. I'll explain why I'll do that once we're in the pose. But to know that, and it's quite a common thing to do in Iyengar Yoga, to use a block up against the wall. There's a bit of a margin to know where the bolster needs to be. So it's a neat fit. But to know that distance from the wall to here, if you're a more petite frame, it might start to push up too high under the diaphragm. So it's not an exact science. Some people will need to move in a little bit closer to the wall. The intention there is that the support you have under the pelvis lifts the pelvis up without tilting the pelvis and tipping the tailbone towards the ceiling. We'll look at that more shortly once we're in the pose, but let's set up for today. It's not the only way. For today, using that block between the bolster and the wall. Again, we'll use that same blanket there for our head. We just pull it back so it's not getting in our way, but if we pull it too far back, when we go to reach it, we won't be able to. So just find that comfortable distance with the blanket away. And now we need to very carefully, very neatly fold two blankets. We start with them in their Sarvangasana fold, and then we fold them lengthways in half. Now make sure that you get the neat folded edge, but also the other edge. Try to fold that as neatly as possible. The first blanket that you place onto the bolster, we have the folded edge facing out towards the center of the room, away from the wall. We add the second blanket, and rather than placing it exactly as we did that first blanket, we turn it the other way, so that the folded edge of the blanket is towards the wall. The other edge, you've got to make sure that it's quite neat. We want a nice crisp fold that we can feel with our lower back and pelvis. The reason that I've done that, when we forward roll in, often the hips will come down, but they'll slide a little bit back. The body will slide a little bit back. If we have the blanket the other way, that sliding action tends to undo the blanket, and it just makes a mess, which is then very hard to correct, and you might find that the blanket's higher under one side or the other side of your pelvis. Notice the height there. I've got one bolster and two blankets. Bolsters vary in shape. Some are flatter, some are taller. You can use the block a little bit as a guide. So that's around about the height of a yoga block. For taller people, even a little bit of extra height would work better. So you can use as many blankets as you need in order to get that height, roughly the length of a yoga block. I'll put that block back in. And then again, I'll break down all the stages to forward rolling. Maybe just watch me do it. I'll see if I can really highlight each stage. We'll do it then a second time, and then you have a go as well. So, first stage, the position of the hands. So just as a general principle, you'll have more control in this pose if your hands are closer to the support that your hips will come onto than your head. So hands need to be a little bit forwards of where the head is placed. So I've got my fingertips level to the bolster. So looking down there, I take note of where the heels of my hands are, and then I'll place the top of my head to that section of the mat. So the top of my head is in line with the heels of my hands, and I'll press firmly the hands down and just move in a little closer with my knees, and that ensures that I get onto the top of the head rather than staying towards the hairline. And I'm just encouraging the back of the skull to release down and the chin to come in towards the throat. Just to make sure that the neck is nicely protected, it's important that your hands are pressing down, so firmly pressing down, but without the elbows being to the floor. So the elbows are just slightly up and off the floor. And then pressing hands down, this is a really key stage, this next one. Knees lift up, not a long way up. I'm pressing my hands down, I'm walking in, and I'm just waiting for my shoulders to make contact with the bolster. Now, it's at this point often that people panic and they don't know whether they're going up or down, and then it's difficult to know how to come out of the pose. So the main thing to remember at this stage, once your shoulders come to the blanket, for some people, just the momentum of making that action will be enough to bring the hips to the wall. But otherwise, we just walk the hands, both of them, a little bit further out towards the center of the room. Then we just press with the hands in order to bring the hips down all the way in contact with the wall. So notice it's described as a forward roll, but we can really break that down, make it a very slow and deliberate action. With practice, you'll probably find that you won't need to pause at that point with the shoulders on the bolster, but it can just be a good stage for many people just to feel confident with their neck and just to ensure that the shoulders will reach the bolster and there won't be any strain put on your neck. From there, we'll just bring the arms out by the sides. We reach back. I can just reach my blanket and slide it in position. All right, so let's go through those stages. Try to break it down as I did there. See if you can pause at that stage where your shoulders meet the support, knowing that for a lot of people, just the momentum of the body probably will make that more of a seamless and flowing movement. With experience, you'll probably just do this more instinctively and you won't need to break it down so much. But it is a pose that for some people can be a little bit of one that they find difficult or they may feel unconfident with. So slowing it down can help with that. Make sure that the head blanket is not going to get in the way of your feet. So if you're practicing this and your intention is to not to stay in the pose for too long, it may even be better just to have that head blanket out of the way so that your feet are able to grip easily onto the yoga mat. We'll go through the stages. First stage, placing the hands shoulder width with the fingertips level to the edge of the bolster. The instinct is to want to bring the head level to the hands, but don't do that. Instead, bring the top of the head to the floor, level to the heels of the hands. Notice when you place your head down, more than likely you're positioning near the hairline, near the forehead there. If you shuffle each knee closer to the face, you can then get more onto the top of the head. And just pressing the hands down, make sure that the elbows are a little bit off the floor, and just a couple of times just rolling on the top of the head, getting the sense of the hands pressing down, how that helps to support the neck. And then we tuck the toes under. Now the knees lift a little bit off the floor, probably about the same height as the elbows, Importantly, both hands need to evenly press down. As you walk in, you roll more towards the back of the skull. You keep walking in until the shoulders come onto the bolster. Now, some of you, just the momentum of that movement might already have taken your hips to the wall, in which case you can just stay where you are. Otherwise, though, both hands slide them away from the bolster towards the feet. It's roughly 5 centimeters, maybe a couple of inches. Feel then once the hands have come out, we've still got the elbows pointing up, and we press the hands down in order to bring the hips to the wall, legs to the wall. Notice there's that little bit of a sliding action, and ideally the blankets there from the hips don't become messed up by that. They stay in that neat fold so that we can clearly feel where the blanket is. We can then reach back. If you've got the head blanket there, slide it in position under the back of the skull. Again, arms out to the side, roughly 45 degrees. The bolster allows that 45-degree angle. The reason that I've got that little bit of a gap there, for some people it might feel like quite a big gap, the mid-width of the narrow width of a block away from the wall. It means so that when that region of the body where the back of the pelvis and the spine join, just check it, where the back of the pelvis and the spine join, where they meet, it needs to release down into the support and fully relax, but without the tailbone tilting upwards towards the heels. Now, if I had the support closer to the wall, or even right up against the wall, I would be able to release down that same region of the spine, but at the expense of the tailbone lifting. If the tailbone lifts, if it slants up towards the heels, it tends to collapse that upper part of the chest. It tends to make that region of the spine close to the base of the neck heavy, sink, flatten to the floor. Having the tailbone a little bit tucked down into that space means that more naturally the shoulders can tuck under, the shoulder blades can stay lifting up into the body, that region of the spine near the base of the neck. It has a lightness to it, lifting up and off the floor, but without needing to really hard push the shoulders or the elbows down into the floor. So for me, having that little bit of a gap works well. However, if you more petite frame, it might be that that gap pushes the bolster too far up into the mid-back and into that diaphragm area. Ideally, the diaphragm releases down in this pose. It shouldn't feel pushed upwards towards the abdominal area. So it is the sort of pose that needs some customization according to your height, but the clarity there, making sure that the tailbone can stay down, not tilting upwards. The chest should feel naturally open. And then when you breathe in, obviously the abdomen lifts eventually each time when you breathe in, but quite early in the inhalation process, you feel that the upper chest also has a chance to inflate, to lift up, spread out. We're not in any way deepening the breath in this pose, just breathing naturally and normally. But the chest should feel open, receptive to the inhalation. Side ribs as well, nice amount of space for them to spread out with each inhalation. But of course the pose very much about the exhalation as well. And you feel that we breathe in, the abdomen lifts up, and then as we breathe out, there's a nice even release of the abdominal area in a downward direction with gravity. So the navel region, it smoothly, evenly releases down. You'll probably find that the pose tends to naturally lengthen a little bit the exhalation in comparison to other poses that maybe have a different effect on the breath. This one definitely gives a nice amount of space and room to the exhalation. There's more than enough time for the breath to complete that cycle. Smooth, even exhalation. Generally, yoga poses that have that effect on the out-breath tend to be very calming, cooling for the nervous system. Viparita Karani, definitely one of those poses. Just before we come out of the pose, just make sure that the
legs. It's not that they are working with a lot of muscular effort, but we want to make sure that the knees are remaining straight, the inner heel's lifting, the big toe base is lifting. Something that can be helpful if we just imagine that we're holding a football, basketball, volleyball, that type of spherical ball on the soles of the feet. Just the amount of work that would be necessary to maintain the contact with the ball, not overworking. The throat relaxes, the face relaxes, a smooth inhalation and exhalation. And then to come out of the pose, we first of all bring the legs to cross leg, and that is particularly important if we've spent longer timing in the pose. It's the type of yoga pose where you could be potentially 15 minutes in the pose. Quite a common amount of time to stay would be a shoulder stand duration, so roughly 7 minutes, up to 10 minutes, somewhere between there. And that allows enough time for the restorative benefits of the pose to really soak into the body. And then we can slide back, hips to the floor with the opposite, cross leg. And from there we can roll to the side and come up. Thank you for practicing with Yoga Selection.